morning. Now, in Uganda, where we elongate time, we stretch time a little bit, and I'm learning how to get back into the English mode. So we'll go along, and then if at some point it's time to finish, you can just let me know.
I'll go.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So we thought we would start with a bit of a quiz. And some of the questions we did do a year and a half ago,
Yes.
and some are new. So we'll just wait for our presentation to come up. And while we're doing that, okay, Ben, here's the bowl. And here's, okay. So I'm very sorry to say I forgot some Ugandan chocolates for you, and they're back in Exeter, but I'm going to post them to you, and perhaps you can enjoy them at a prayer meeting or something. But we've got a few questions, and if you get the answer right, you can have the joy of trying a Ugandan delicacy, which is grasshoppers. So, it's supposed to be choose you a grasshopper or a chocolate, but I've left the chocolates. So yeah, these are grasshoppers. You'll tell us what happens when the rains come.
So in November, we have a heavy rain season, and with it come grasshoppers, and people lay out a few items to grab these grasshoppers. They fall into a drum. The grasshoppers are stripped of their wings and legs, and then they're fried on a frying pan. They're very nice protein.
And I think they taste like salt and vinegar crisps. So you don't have to try them, but anybody who wants to can. So, okay, back on track, the quiz. Here's the Ugandan flag. Does anybody know what the colours in the flag represent? Yellow, black and red. Anyone want to have a guess?
Yes.
You can pick any colour.
Pick any color.
I pick any color.
Yeah?
Black represents the black people.
Yes,
Correct.
it does. Thank you. Would you like a grasshopper?
Yes.
Yes, excellent.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, black, the people. Okay, another colour. Who wants to have a guess? What do you think yellow might be?
The sun.
Yeah, who was that? Grasshopper? Oh, look at this bunny. And red. Does anyone want to guess what red might be?
We have the same blood.
You what?
We have the same blood.
Yes, it is. Are you from Uganda? Would you like a whole handful of Uganda? Please go and, our sister over there. Yes, it's brotherhood, it's the blood.
Yes, it is.
Okay, now we might ban you from these other questions.
Yes.
Okay, next question, number 2.
Right. When you look at the flag, in the middle, there is a little bird in there. Do you want to have a guess at what bird that is?
It's the national bird for Uganda. Anyone know?
I can give you a clue.
Yes, someone said it. The crested crane.
Yes, it is.
Grasshoppers?
Yeah.
Why would you not want grasshoppers on a Sunday morning at church? All right, next question. Does anybody know where in the world Uganda is? Africa. Okay, let's narrow it. Okay, who was that? Grasshoppers? Let's narrow it down. Which part of Africa?
East Africa.
East Africa, yes. And I think if we have our next... Oh, okay, one more question before the next slide. Does anyone know the 5 countries that surround Uganda?
Kenya.
Yes?
That's correct.
You want grasshoppers? Get the grasshoppers out. Kenya, Lee.
South Sudan.
South Sudan, yes. Now you can't say no, can you? Because all your congregation are eating grasshoppers.
I may not eat it.
Kenya, Tanzania, what did you say? South Sudan. Okay, we've got 3 more. Yes. Yes, thank
that's
you.
correct.
Grasshopper? People are allowed to say no.
Zimbabwe.
It's not Zimbabwe. Rwanda. Did someone say Rwanda? Rwanda. And lastly,
Burundi.
not Burundi. It's the...
No.
Nearly.
But
Well, sort of.
the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Aha. So let's have our next slide. So hopefully, and the next one as well. We'll zoom in. There we go. That's where we've been. Okay, next question. How many months were schools closed for during COVID? It was the longest school closure in the whole world. So have a guess. Have a guess. How many months do you think?
12.
It's less than 36, more than 12,
24.
more than 20, less than 25, 22. So that's actually quite serious, really, because children have missed almost 2 years of schooling. And it's the youngest country in the whole world. So 50% of the population is 15 or under. Okay, let me tell you this for the sake of time. My favourite fruit, let's see the next slide. This is my favourite fruit. So tropical fruits in Uganda are amazing. Pineapple, mango, but passion fruit is my favourite. And Bernie, what's your favourite fruit?
Jackfruit.
Has anyone heard of jackfruit? Yeah? Let's see the picture. So you can see on the tree, that's the fruit, and it can grow up, it can weigh up to 30 kilograms. So a jackfruit can weigh up to that. It's the largest tree-borne fruit globally. And Bernie loves it.
I love it. Not as much as I love you, though.
Oh, good. Okay. I've eclipsed jackfruit. Wonderful. Okay, so we thought we'd teach you a common greeting. So greetings are very important in Uganda. And over to you.
Right. So when believers gather together, we greet each other with a greeting that says, "Praise the Lord." In Uganda, we say that as Mukama Yebazibwe. Shall you repeat after me? Mukama Yebazibwe. And the response would be
Amina.
Amen. Shall we try it again? Mukama Yebazibwe.
Amina.
Well done. Very well done.
Great. What's our next slide?
Right.
Do you want a children's song? Is there time for a song? Okay.
Then let's sing together. When we gather, we want to remind ourselves of the qualities of God. And one of the qualities we sing about is the goodness of God. Jesus is good. So the line in Uganda is what we're going to sing. And it says, Yesu, Jesus, mulungi, is good. Yesu mulungi. So it goes like this. I hope Ian can give us the melody. You learn as we go along.
Hey, Bernie, people don't always do that, just like that.
Oh, sorry. If you can, that would be helpful. Because my singing is also something
You know
else.
this song. Please come and help us. Alright, what's your name?
Miriam.
Miriam, wonderful.
Yesu mulungi, Yesu mulungi, ye mulungi.
Pause there, let's repeat.
So, we're going to sing Yesu mulungi, and you respond, Ye mulungi. Yes, he is good. So, we're going to sing Yesu mulungi, and you respond with the words in blue, Ye mulungi. And we'll sing again Yesu mulungi, and you respond, Ye mulungi. Then we'll sing it again, Yesu mulungi, Ye mulungi, and then all together we'll say, Ye mulungi, Ye mulungi.
Go slow, yeah?
Alright, I'll go slow. Shall we try that? Yesu mulungi, Ye mulungi, Yesu mulungi, Ye mulungi, Yesu mulungi, Ye mulungi. Together, Ye mulungi, Ye mulungi. Very well
Let's do it
done.
once more.
Let's do it from the top, right? Yesu mulungi, Yesu mulungi, Ye mulungi, Yesu mulungi, Yesu mulungi, Ye mulungi, Yesu mulungi, Yesu mulungi, Ye mulungi, Ye mulungi,
Okay, so just a little bit. We'll be talking in much more detail this evening, but just a little bit about what we've been doing. So for the last 7 years, I've been seconded to a Christian organisation called Word of Life, and they work to support children's and youth ministries in local churches. And they do many different things, and I've been involved in ladies' ministry, Sunday school ministry, and biblical counselling. And with everything they're doing, they're trying to tell people the good news about Jesus and disciple them to grow in their love and their knowledge of Jesus. And when Bernie and I started to go to the church there, if you see that top left-hand picture, that's what the Sunday school looked like. So about up to 90 children, from babies to 13-year-olds, often with one person teaching and a few other sort of teenage helpers. So we walked in and said, "Oh, can we help?" And they said, "Yes, take half of them over there." And I came back and said, "What are we teaching them?" They gave me a Bible verse, and I told Bernie the Bible verse, and we did something. But over time, we've had the privilege of growing a leadership team for the Sunday school, and now we're actually in 3 separate age-related groups, and we've got more leaders. And the bottom one, this was our group, the 11 to the 13-year-olds, and we've been studying the gospel for the last term until we came here. And I think out of the whole 90, 14 or 15 children put their faith in the Lord Jesus, which was just wonderful. And then the next slide, kind of linked in with that, I've been doing Sunday school ministry with lots of different churches in Kampala. So some of the bigger churches, the biggest Anglican church in Uganda, been working with them for about all 7 years, but then also churches that meet just in kind of tin sheds. Lots of people are coming and saying, "Can you train our leaders and spend time helping us to know how best to teach the children that we've got in our Sunday schools?" So that's a lot of what I've been doing, along with this next slide.
So I worked with an organization called Living Word Uganda, which was created to help train university student leaders to be able to teach the Bible to their fellow students. Because students would go to university and end up in small groups that became congregations, but they didn't have pastors that were trained. So the student leader who led the group essentially was the minister, the pastor, but they were not trained themselves to teach the Bible. So we started off by running a students' conference, and then we moved that from just a students' conference, and then we also created a program for training ministry assistants in teaching the Bible faithfully. Alongside that, Living Word Uganda has also done seminars for students and churches across the country, where we train people to be able to read the Bible faithfully, apply it to themselves, and be able to teach the people that they're leading in the groups and in the congregations that they're leading. So Living Word just focuses on training people in teaching the Bible faithfully, and we've both been a part of that.
And one of the comments we get repeatedly when we're doing work with this organisation is people saying, "We've never read through a whole book of the Bible before. It's not something that's sort of common practice." And they're just so excited to see God speaking through whole books of the Bible and what that teaches them and us. And I think, are we next? Oh, okay, when we're not doing all our Bible stuff, that we live on a compound, or we lived on a compound. And there'll be 3 houses, and then the guard's family, the guard's children, we spent a lot of time looking after. So that's just a picture of all our neighbours and children. And we kind of do life together. We're in and out of each other's houses. It's very social. When I come back from work, there'll be all these children to open the gate, take all my bags, and they're sat on my sofa before I've got halfway to the house, aren't they? So yeah, I tend to fill the house with people, and after a while, Bernie says, "Now let's say goodbye to people." We've got a 1.5 minute video. Is that worth? Yeah. Okay. Great. No, we do it in the evening. We do it now. We do it in the evening.
Up to you, but probably evening might be better.
Okay, we'll do it in the evening. Come and see the video if you this evening, and let's finish with our prayer pointers. Is that the next one?
The next two.
Yes, there we go.
That's the
Oh,
one.
it's quite small, isn't it? So I think do pray for wisdom with us. I haven't lived in England for 7 years, and Uganda is just very different to Britain. So we are learning that lots of things are new and different, and people pay for things on their phone, and there's 20 different types of toothpaste and tomatoes, and sometimes it's a bit overwhelming, isn't it? So we'd appreciate your prayers as we settle back to living here. And we do also need to raise a bit more support. We're talking with Crosslinks at the moment, finalising that budget. So yeah, we've got a little bit of a way to go there, not too much. And then...
Yep, we are going to spend the next couple of years training for ministry at Oak Hill College. So please pray for us as we settle in and we're part of a new church and living in a new community. Please pray that we can be trained very well and that we'll be growing in our love for Jesus and the love for God's people as we are trained. And also please pray that we're able to get Rachael onto a master's program for her to be trained in biblical counseling and theology, because that will do a great deal for our work back in Uganda.
And the long-term plan is church planting and church ministry in Uganda. So there you go. There's a little snapshot.
Brilliant, thank you.
And please, if you want more grasshoppers at the end, please come and see us. And we've also got some Ugandan snacks that are more normal for English people.
So, life under the sun has been our topic for these last few weeks. That's the phrase that Ecclesiastes, the word means the teacher, uses to describe what he sees around him in this world, life under the sun. And this morning we are looking at the venture of faith in these first 6 verses of chapter 11. We're coming to the conclusion, actually, of this book. Ecclesiastes has been exploring the barren landscape of this world, and he's looking for meaning in life under the sun. But he is looking for meaning without success. His conclusion that everything is vanity. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity, or emptiness, or insubstantialness. It doesn't last. There's nothing here that I can actually hold on to that makes this life meaningful, that gives purpose to it. The word for vanity is to do with the idea of vapour. Something that actually, you breathe out vapour in the winter and you see your breath for a few seconds and it just disappears, doesn't it? That's what vanity is, he says. There's nothing substantial in this world. In fact, as he begins the book of Ecclesiastes, he sees that the world is repetitive, it's a cycle of nature. He finds it wearisome and toilsome, but actually as he goes on through the book, I don't know whether you've seen this as we've been looking at it, the more he searches, the less sense life makes. Chapter 9 and verse 3, just the previous chapter or so, he says this is the evil. It's not just meaningless, it's evil. This is the evil in everything that happens under the sun. A phrase that Agatha Christie took for her novel, isn't it? Evil under the sun. The same destiny overtakes all. The hearts of men, moreover, are full of evil, and there is madness in their hearts while they live, and afterwards they join the dead. It's getting worse. In chapter 9 and verse 11, he says, the race is not to the swift, nor battle to the strong, nor food comes to the wise. Things don't happen as they ought to, nor wealth to the brilliant, or favours to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all. Life is a lottery, he's saying, in effect there, isn't he? And yet, despite this understanding he has of the world, he refuses to give in to despair. And repeatedly during the book, he counsels faith in God, fear of God. Even at the times, God seems very remote and his ways beyond our understanding. But now in chapter 11, there is a change of mood and of tone. Some of the more depressing aspects of the previous chapters, he now almost like throws away. And we find a much more positive approach here in chapter 11. Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it again. Cast your bread. It sounds, doesn't it, a very impressive phrase. When I first read Ecclesiastes, I thought there's somehow this great wisdom in this verse. Cast your bread upon the waters, and after many days you will find it again. But I have to confess, when I first read it, what came up in my mind, what I conjured up, was a mental picture of throwing bread to ducks at a local pond. We used to go down to the local pond with our children when they were quite young and take some bread with us and throw it to the ducks and the geese there. Now, some of you will say you shouldn't do that. You're right, I've done that since, but at that time we weren't aware that bread was not good for ducks. But I often would do this, and I often wonder about Ecclesiastes. How can a piece of sodden bread, if it comes back to you, be of any use? You know, you throw your bread out into the water, and it comes back to you, but it'd be mush, wouldn't it? Why do I want my bread to come back to me? But in fact, what we have here is not actually speaking about bread, as you see it there, but it's speaking about commerce. You see, bread is another word for grain. And what Ecclesiastes is saying here is that actually, whatever you have in the way of what you can trade with, what you have in terms of your wherewithal, whatever commodity you may have, it may be grain. Grain was very common in those days, something you could trade with. Whatever you have at your disposal, use it, trade with it. We often don't think of Solomon, do we, as a trader, as a merchant. But King Solomon, who we understand to be the person behind Ecclesiastes here, the king of Jerusalem, trade was central to his empire. And not only his empire, but also the temple as well. So, for instance, quite early on in the book of 1 Kings, we read that when he had plans to build the temple, he shipped grain to Lebanon, to King Hiram of Tyre, and he received back timber, particularly cedar and pine, that he would use to help construct the temple. Here is a typical example of the sort of ships that the Phoenicians, people from Lebanon and King Hiram, and probably also Solomon, would have used in their trades. Listen to these words from 1 Kings about Solomon's trade. King Solomon also built ships at Ezion-Geber, which is near Elath in Edom, on the shore of the Red Sea, right in the south of Israel. If you know the Red Sea, where it comes up there, there's a port there. Even today, it's a tourist attraction. It's near Elath in Edom, on the shore of the Red Sea. And Hiram, the king of Tyre, up in Lebanon, he sent his men, sailors who knew the sea, to serve in the fleet with Solomon's men. They sailed to Ophir and brought back 420 talents of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon. And then in the next chapter, Hiram's ships brought gold from Ophir, and from there they brought great cargoes of almug wood and precious stones. The king used the almug wood to make supports for the temple of the Lord and for the royal palace, and to make harps and lyres for the musicians. So much almug wood has never been imported or seen since that day. And in verse 22, the king, that's Solomon again, had a fleet of trading ships at sea, along with the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years, so 3 years it took, these ships returned, carrying gold, silver and ivory, and apes and baboons. So there you see, there's a picture of Solomon casting off his ships. That's his bread into the waters on the sea. And 3 years later they returned with these great cargoes that they've been trading with all that Solomon had perhaps put on the vessel at the beginning. 3 years, it took some time, didn't it, for that ship to come back. But when it did, it came back stocked with lots of riches that Solomon could use to enhance the greatness of his empire, but also to build the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem. So what we have here, therefore, in verses 1 and 2, is an exhortation to trade with what we've got, even if at first we don't see the return on our investment, maybe even as much as 3 years. In verse 2, we're told to spread our investments. So here is some more wise advice for those who have the capital to spend. Give portions to 7, yes to 8, for you do not know what disaster may come upon the lands. So spread your investments, or it could also mean, and maybe as well as, give generously. Give generously, spread out, so that the money you have, give it out to people, these into portions that you can actually support other people with. Because you may not have that money for very long. I was listening to Richard Branson on the BBC News a little while ago, I think it was in May, and this very rich billionaire was saying that he was scared silly during the pandemic because all his business ventures were actually being undermined by the pandemic, and he was afraid he was going to actually go bankrupt. He lost, he says, £1.5 billion. £1.5 billion during the pandemic. He's still a very rich man today, of course, but you could see the fear in his face. All that money he'd accumulated over his lifetime. He's now an old man, isn't he? He must be around about 80 or so, I would guess. And he could see it all going down the drain. So the writer says here, look, you may have a lot of wealth. Well, use it while you can. Give portions to 7, yes to 8. For you do not know what disaster may come upon the lands. Time and chance happen to all men, even the rich. And suddenly they can find themselves destitute and very poor. So cast your breads. But there is danger lurking everywhere. Verse 3, if clouds are full of water, they pour rain upon the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there will it lie. The mention of disaster in verse 4 there, sorry, in verses 3 and 4, it comes from, of course, verse 2, where it talks about disaster coming upon the lands. These two verses are somewhat enigmatic, verses 3 and 4, aren't they? But I think we can understand the gist of them from that context. Disasters will happen. Clouds that are full of rain are going to drop on someone, aren't they? You can't prevent it happening. I don't know if you're like me, you stood in Exeter, perhaps in your back garden, looked out over the River Exe, and you've seen the prevailing winds coming from the southwest, and you can see the clouds, can't you, as they approach. And over the hulls and hills, you can see the rain dropping. And you think, is that coming my way? If you're about to mow the lawn, whatever you might be doing out in the garden, you think, shall I go inside now because I'm going to get drenched if I stay out here? Sometimes they miss us, and sometimes they hit, don't they? But you know they're going to drop on someone because you can see the rain and you can see it falling, as you can here in this particular slide. A tree falling in a storm is less predictable than the rain. You can see the rain coming, can't you? And it may hit you. But when a tree falls in a storm, you've no warning at all. The wind blows, but you don't know whether the tree is going to fall or not. It's not predictable. But again, when it happens, there's nothing you can do about it. And once fallen, isn't going to move, is it? You can see that actually that sort of size of tree, particularly in Solomon's time, they didn't have chainsaws, would have been there for an awful long time. We can spend a lot of time, can't we, wishing that things were different from the way they've turned out, but to no avail. The rain falls, the tree lies on the ground, you can't change these things. And fear of such disasters can paralyse us, can't it? We can think about these things and actually they can completely control our minds. I found it very interesting to watch over the last few years during this pandemic, people who have become almost paranoid through the experience of going through this COVID pandemic. Fearful now, after the pandemic, of ever leaving their home. Fearful of mixing with people. Fearful of even going shopping because of what might happen if they do. So that's why we have verse 4 here. Solomon's advice is this: whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. If you try to anticipate disaster, it can simply be a recipe for doing nothing. You spend your time looking at the clouds and worrying about them. Are they going to fall on me? Or looking at the tree and the wind comes in, will it fall? And where is it going to fall? Will it fall on me or my home or my car, whatever it may be? And yet all you're doing is wasting your time, isn't it? Time and chance happen to us all. We can't predict these things. And yet we try so hard, don't we, to do that and to be fearful of what might happen on a rainy day. Verse 5 picks up this picture of wind and compares it to the forming of the body in a mother's womb. When I was out in Canada with my daughter and son-in-law, on the back of their front door of their flat, they have some pictures of Tobias when he was in the womb. The scans, the ultrasound scans that were made, and so they saw Tobias even before he came to birth. They could see the body forming there in the womb. It was lovely pictures for them to see this happening. And yet still, of course, when the baby is born, it's a miracle, isn't it? Because although we can see that embryo in the womb, and we can see it growing and becoming a child, how it all happens, how the heart forms, how the lungs form, how the eyes are formed in the womb, what a miracle it is. Those small cells in the very beginning grow and grow into becoming a fully formed human being, thinking, conscious, feeling, smelling, sensing things. Wow, isn't it incredible? Just it's not just chemistry, is it? You can put chemicals together, but you can't make a human being. Not like God can. So Ecclesiastes says, just as you don't know the path of the winds, or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. We thought about, didn't we, at the beginning of the service, that God is the maker of all things, the source of all life, the one who said, let there be light, and there was light. It's his mind that created this universe, an incredible mind. We don't understand it. We shouldn't pretend to, although people often do. And the point here is, what Ecclesiastes is saying, is that we are not able to read God's mind, and particularly we cannot see into the future. We can't predict the things that are going to happen. We can't anticipate disasters. They happen out of the blue. We've all seen, I'm sure, some of those films of the tsunami in 2004. And people lying on a beach, sunbathing, out somewhere in the Far East. And then suddenly you see that they're looking up and there is this huge tidal wave coming towards them, perhaps 100 metres away. It's going to kill them. And 1 second they are enjoying life and thinking, this is having the time of my life. And the next minute, they're hit by this huge disaster that overwhelms. I think it was 250,000 people who died in that tsunami. So the writer here says, look, we need to understand we don't know God's ways. We need to recognise our limitations. It's a call, isn't it, to humility. To actually put ourselves under God and to fear him. To recognise that he is God. We are not masters of the universe. But you know, there's a TV series, isn't it, that talks about masters of the universe, talks about people like us being masters of the universe or captains of our souls. We like to think we rule this place. We try to, don't we? But we're not. And here Ecclesiastes is saying, please recognise this. Know your limitations. Recognise, therefore, your place in this universe as a creature under a great God who has made us for his purposes. So in verse 6, the final verse here, sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let not your hands be idle. You do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. You do not know. But get on with your sowing. You see, in some ways, verse 6 is similar, isn't it, to verse 1. Cast your bread upon the waters, he begins. And here at the end of this section, sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let not your hands be idle. Get on with it. It's another metaphor here, isn't it? Like trading. So that's what we're hearing here. You can see it's a much more positive exhortation from Ecclesiastes than we've been hearing so far. But here's the next question I have for us this morning. How do we interpret this? The Bible was written, much of it, thousands of years ago, and written to different cultures, just as we have here this morning, people from Africa and elsewhere, this country as well as elsewhere in the world. We have different cultures, don't we? And we come to this country, and like Bernie and Rachael, it takes some time to adjust. Well, we also have to adjust here, don't we, to a different culture and recognise that actually this is speaking to a culture many thousands of years before our own culture. We need to interpret it before we actually apply it to our own lives. So I think three things I'd like to say about this passage as we come to interpret it. First of all, what we're seeing here, I think, is a metaphor for our approach to life in general. Cast your bread or sow your seed is a metaphor, a picture of how we can, or how we should approach life. I say it because all through this book we've seen Ecclesiastes and his concern for how we find meaning in this world, and how we live. Wisdom literature, which is Ecclesiastes is part of the Bible's wisdom literature, is speaking about how we have the wisdom to live successfully, if you like, to know how God wants us to live in this world. Chapters 4 to 10 could leave us quite depressed. Maybe you have been quite depressed by those chapters. Necessarily so, I think. Because the world is a place of vanity, and often worse, as I said earlier, a place of cruelty or perversity, of deep disillusionment and perhaps deep bitterness. Perhaps some of you this morning are hurting ever so much from the way the world has treated you over the course of your years. People often say, oh, it's a mad world. It is, says Ecclesiastes, it is a mad world. We can identify with that, can't we? It would be easy to respond defensively, to circle the wagons like in the Wild West, to batten down the hatches if we're on a ship in a storm. And as Christians say, well, let's just wait for the return of Christ. Let's just put our heads down and hope that Christ will come soon and the whole thing will just go away. But no, says the teacher, Ecclesiastes, it is time for action, even amidst the worst things that the world can do. Think positively. Don't be overcome with worry and anxiety. Cast your bread. Trade whatever you have in terms of the gifts that God has given you. So that's the first thing that we can say. It's a metaphor for how to approach life. Don't be negative. I mean, all the bad things that happen in this world. Don't let them overcome you. Secondly, as we bring it forward to the New Testament and see how the New Testament sheds light on the Old Testament, we see that Jesus taught a similar message. Matthew 6 and verse 34, he said, therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, what's coming. Because tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So like Ecclesiastes, he says, don't look at the future. You can't tell the future. Just concentrate on the day and what you're able to do in that day. And Matthew 25 and verses 14 to 23 is the parable of talents. And there in the parable of talents, you may know the story. The king, who is a picture of Jesus, is going away. He's going to heaven, of course, where he ascended. And he gives talents. He gives some gifts to his servants. To one he gives 5, to one he gives 2, to one he gives 1. He says, look, go away, while I'm away, make the most of what you've got. Trade with it. And of course, the one who's got 5 goes away and makes 5 more, doesn't he? He trades with his 5 talents, makes 5 more. And one with 2 goes away and trades that and makes 2 more. And when the king comes back, he says, well done, you good and faithful servants. Because they've done something with what God has given them. We'll come to the other side in a little while. So Jesus teaches something quite similar, therefore, to Ecclesiastes. Be adventurous, make the most of your gifts, take risks. But thirdly, we look at the New Testament, we see something else. We see God himself, like Solomon, is a trader. He is a merchant. He put his own teaching into practice himself. When, after the fall of man, he looked out and looked at the world, he saw a world just like Ecclesiastes saw it. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on this earth, and his heart was filled with pain. Perhaps that's some of you this morning. Like Ecclesiastes, he looks at the world and sees evil there, evil under the sun, and his heart is filled with pain. But doing nothing is not an option for God. He does something. He casts his bread upon the waters. He sent Jesus Christ. Who is Jesus Christ? The living bread, who came from heaven, he says, to earth for us. He sent Jesus Christ, the living bread, to this earth. He cast him out upon the waters, if you like. He invested the most precious thing that he has in us. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that we should not perish, but that we should have eternal life. God was generous. He gave portions of 7, yes, to 8, so that we could benefit from all his goodness towards us. In the book of 2 Corinthians, I mentioned it there, Paul is speaking to the Corinthian church, and he mentions the Macedonian churches who have given generously out of what little wealth they had to support the Corinthians. They were spending as well. They were trading. They were giving their money that they had, or they didn't have sometimes. They were giving so much, says Paul, to you Corinthians to support you. And he says this to the Corinthians, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor. He spent everything he had, that you through his poverty might become rich. Do you see the trade going on there? That Jesus Christ, who was rich, spent everything, that we might benefit from that and become rich through him becoming poor. There is the greatest trade this world has ever seen. And do you know how long Jesus ministered on this earth for? It was 3 years, wasn't it? I don't know whether it's significant or not. The same 3-year period that Solomon's ships were out there on the seas, trading and coming back with their rich cargo. 3 years Jesus ministered in this world for us and was hung on a cross. But there was long-term gain. Jesus himself said, about to go to the cross, he says this, I tell you the truth, unless a grain of wheat, a piece of bread, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground, it dies and remains only a seed. But if it falls to the ground, it becomes many seeds. That's the trade, isn't it, that God himself undertook. He is the one who's given us an example in this whole matter of how we should trade. God has put his own teaching into action. So how can we apply that this morning to ourselves? Well, first of all, some of you here may not be Christians. That's fine. We're very glad you're here. And I want to say that Ecclesiastes is a book written to a secular world. It pictures the world under the sun. That is, if you like, without the vision of heaven, without the understanding of heaven there. It looks out on the world and describes it as he sees it. Perhaps you see it this morning yourself. And so this advice here, I think, has general application for everyone. This is how to approach life under the sun, whether you are Christian or not. Don't let worry and anxiety paralyse you. Rainy days happen all the time. So commit yourselves to whatever your hand gives you to do. Have a look at chapter 9 again and verse 10. That's the little way back in Ecclesiastes. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the grave where you are going, what about that next week? There is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. So while you've got it, use it. Death may come at any time, he says, to everyone. Don't let the rainy days, don't let worry and anxiety paralyse you. But I think for Christians, this has a particular application to people of faith. Faith, I believe in the Bible, is spelled R-I-S-K. Risk. Doing nothing was not an option for God. It's not an option for us either if we call ourselves believers, if we call ourselves Christians. When Jesus told that parable of those 3 servants with the talents, the final one, I think, is meant to be also a servant, someone who claims that he is a believer, and takes the talent and wraps it up in a handkerchief and buries it in the ground. And then when the master returns, says, here is your talent, thinking, I've looked after it, it's been well looked after in that handkerchief under the ground there, you can have it back now. And he is described as a worthless, wicked servant. And Jesus says in this parable, or the king says through Jesus, it says, take that worthless servant and cast him into the outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Do you see the importance that Jesus attaches to trade? If you say you're a Christian and you're not trading, if you're not putting your life on the line, if you like, at times, you're not taking risks with what you've got, then how can you claim to be a genuine believer? This is part and parcel of the faith. It is spelled R-I-S-K. Does that reflect in your lives this morning? When Jesus was speaking to the disciples and Peter said, no, you should not go to the cross. Don't go there, whatever you do. You're too good for that. To be mutilated and put up on their death and hung there, that's a terrible idea. The idea that Jesus is going to spend everything for them. And so Peter doesn't understand at all what the gospel is. And Jesus says to him, among other things, says this, for whoever wants to save his life, in other words, batten down the hatches, bury the talent, and make sure that you keep it for yourself for that last day, whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life, for me and for the gospel, if you like, whoever spends his life for me and for the gospel will save it. In eternity, for that heavenly day when Christ comes again, that is when you'll receive that welcome. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. Now let me come into my great happiness here and enter into this treasure I have for you for eternity. That is the message for Christians from this passage this morning. It doesn't mean risk by way of being reckless. It doesn't mean being irrational. It doesn't mean being vainglorious. Our faith, if you have a faith this morning, our faith is posited on the promises of God. What he has said he will do for those who obey him and follow his words. As people have done through the ages, as in Hebrews 11, that great chapter of faith, that gallery of faith, people like Abraham, who left his home in Ur and went to a land he did not know where it was, with Lot and Sarah, not knowing where he was going, but trusting that God would take him to the promised land. Or Rahab, who risked her life in Jericho to shelter the spies. If she'd been caught, she'd been executed. But she believed that what they were saying was true, that there was a promised land that the Israelites were going to inherit. It was their land. It was going to be destroyed, and the Israelites would come in and inherit it. She believed them, and she was saved. Moses, who had the opportunity to be an heir to Pharaoh, but gave it up, took that risk of opposing Pharaoh, leading Israel out of Egypt, because he believed in the promises of God. Paul, the apostle, who believed there was an eternal inheritance waiting for him, who said to the Corinthians, I'm prepared to spend and to be spent for your sakes. William Carey, who went out to India as a missionary and was there for many, many years before he saw a single convert, spent his life over there. It was more than 3 years for him before he saw a return. But today there is a burgeoning church in India. I suspect there's probably more Christians in India today than there are in the United Kingdom. He was the first, I think, British missionary to work over there. Attempt great things for God, he says, and expect great things from God. Trade, he said. I'm going to go out there and spend myself. What are you going to do? Or Jim Elliot, who went out to the Ecuadorian jungle and with 4 other missionary friends was martyred there by the Ecuadorian Indians. But now there is again a church there. And some of those, even those who actually martyred Jim Elliot and his followers, became Christians in the years after that. So how does your life compare? I'm not asking you to go out and be martyred, although I don't know what God will ask of you. But are you prepared to do what he says, to cast your bread upon the waters and sow your seed in the morning and in the evening, to be active in your Christian life, to be spending what you have been given? What are you doing in terms of your own giving? Are you holding back more than you ought to in terms of your worldly wealth? Right, your time and your energy, where does that go? What sort of pursuits, what sort of interests do you have? And where are you spending that time? Is it being usefully spent? Are you actually contributing towards not building the temple, as was Solomon's trade, but are you contributing towards the New Testament equivalent of the temple, which is the church? How much have you invested in this place? And not only this place here, of course, but other churches as well that we support. Rachael and Bernie, for instance. I want to recommend, as I close, just a couple of books. One is, well, they're both in the bookstore, but one's been taken out. They haven't got Don't Waste Your Life by John Piper. Marjorie read it recently and returned it, but someone's borrowed it since then. But I do want to recommend that book, Don't Waste Your Life by John Piper. Saying exactly what I said this morning, but more, pretty better as well. And this book as well, which is in the bookstore, it'll be there afterwards, Risk, R-I-S-K, is right. And here he argues, it's a very short book, about 50 pages, and it's quite large print. It takes you maybe a couple of hours to read through. And he will convince you here from the Bible that risk is right. If you're a person of faith this morning, God wants you to be a risk taker, a trader, a merchant, a worthy servant who uses what he has, or she has, in order to further God's purposes on this earth, that he might say, when he meets us, well done, good and faithful servant. Been faithful in a few things, I will give you many things. Let's bow our heads.